The 2020 election exposed a number of questionable electoral practices across the country and in North Carolina. Our next guest just highlighted one of them in a John Locke Foundation research brief. It's titled, "It is Time to End Absentee Ballot Postmark Games." Its author is Dr. Andy Jackson, director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the Locke Foundation. And this is something that I think a lot of people probably didn't realize until the last election, and that is some of these ballots don't necessarily have to be in by Election Day. Tell us about that.
No, they don't. And there's a couple of different classes here. One, there are military and overseas ballots, and by federal law, they have to be accepted 9 days after the election. And that's really outside the control of the state, the Board of Elections, or the legislature. The other thing we have is that by law, the deadline to receive an absentee ballot, that the county board has to receive the absentee ballot, is 5 o'clock on Election Day. But there's an exception. The exception is if it's postmarked by Election Day, they can receive it up to 3 days after. And that's caused some confusion and some problems.
And before we get into some of the confusion, one piece of confusion during this last election cycle by itself was that there was some litigation that stretched that 3 days to the 9 days that you were talking about for military ballots, which doesn't have anything to do with the law.
Yeah, they did. The State Board of Elections, in a settlement with Mark Elias, Roy Cooper's attorney from 2016, said, okay, well, we'll agree to extend that out to the 9 days for military and overseas. And part of the reason that that happened was because 3 days is kind of an arbitrary number. I mean, why 3? Why not 4? I mean, there's an expectation that if you send it, it should get a ballot, it should be sent in, it should be received, I should say, within 3 days. However, the post office has said, well, that's not really a great idea to depend on that, and they recommend at least a week. So by having this 3 days, it creates confusion and increases, ironically, the likelihood that a ballot could come in late.
Well, beyond the confusion that was tied to the 2020 election itself, you just pointed out that the law itself does build in this extra 3 days, and that causes confusion in some ways. Your research brief points to some examples, cases in which a ballot came in and there was some dispute or confusion about when it came in, wrong postmarks on a ballot, all kinds of interesting issues that are tied to this exception in the law.
Indeed. And a big example of this, with the really, really close campaign for Supreme Court between Paul Newby and Sherry Beasley, it was only about 400 votes difference. So they were competing. They were going to county boards talking about all these individual ballots. And there was just one particular debate over a ballot. They said, well, it came in 2 days after. It didn't have a postmark. But the Beasley campaign said, well, clearly it couldn't have gotten, unless it was mailed by Election Day, it couldn't have gotten here in 1 day. So surely it was in the mail stream. That's the term that they used. And the Newby campaign argued, the opposite, of course. Eventually, the county board decided not to accept that ballot. And then in Wake County, they had to actually bring somebody from the post office to say, oh, I'm sorry. Instead of stamp, I had the wrong date on the stamp when I stuck it on there. And so these particular little batch of ballots, about a half dozen, should be counted because we did receive them, even though the postmark was on the day after elections. So yeah, it's created a bunch of mess like that, in addition to, like I said before, somewhat ironically, perhaps increasing the likelihood that ballots not be counted because they came in late.
The title of your brief is "It is Time to End Absentee Ballot Postmark Games," and one of the points of your brief is that this would actually be a fairly simple problem to fix.
It is. It just takes a tweak in the law. You don't even have to change the law. The deadline is already there, 5 o'clock on Election Day. There are 3 exceptions in the law. Federal law requires it in the case of military or absent or overseas. And of course, that overlaps with the first one. And if it's postmarked, you just eliminate that one difference. And that would also put North Carolina in the norm, because 32 states out of our 50, and including all mail ballot states like Colorado and Oregon require ballots to come in by election day. It's the norm, and it's an easy fix, so there's really no reason why we can't have it get done this year.
Some people might say, oh, this is going to hurt those who would like to use this mail-in option because anyone else, they could vote on election day. These folks might want to cast a ballot on election day, and they wouldn't be able to do that because it wouldn't arrive in time. Your brief points out that if you're going to make this change, you should also make some other changes to ensure that those who use mail-in balloting will not fall into that problem.
Right. Well, the post office already recommended that there should be a deadline 15 days out for requesting an absentee ballot. And so I think we should, right now, North Carolina law, it's only 7 days. You can request a ballot 7 days. So you just say, for example, if you did it through mail, there are other options, but if you did it through mail, you mail it to the County Board of Elections, then they mail you the ballot, then you mail the ballot back. The likelihood that you're going to accomplish all that in 7 days is pretty low. And so I think we should also go along with the Postal Service recommendations and push that out to 15 days. It seems long, but the whole point about this is that, if folks are going to be in the state during that time, and they want to vote earlier, they can go ahead and follow through and do that. The people that may need more time are the folks that are overseas or in the military, because you never know, how deployments might work. And there's already the 9-day limit for those folks. If folks are going to be out of town like a week before, they could always vote early, one stop.
We've talked about the fact that the law as it stands now creates confusion. What does it do about people's assessments of election integrity?
Well, that is a problem. Putting voters at ease is a necessary thing. That is something that officials should be doing, because if people have more confidence in the electoral system, that votes are being counted properly, that increases participation. There are people that say, well, I'm never going to vote again because I think the system is rigged. That is really unfortunate. And I think by having this deadline on a day in a way that's not confusing, where you don't have these veritable times when ballots are being counted, I think that would increase people's perception of the integrity of the system, increase voter confidence, and also boost turnout.
The title of the brief, once again, is It Is Time to End Absentee Ballot Postmark Games. The author of that brief is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.